If I look cold, it's because I am. We're having our first cold snap of the season. It's like 20 degrees in here. So we got the little heater going. That's that sound you hear in the background, but it's really not doing anything. So, at any rate, yesterday was a crafty day in the shop. Our little hot rod hovel here. We finally got back to work on the Barracuda, and Nick, who owns the car, he's getting his hands in it finally, and I was teaching him the fine art or the fine points of block sanding. So I was explaining to him, this is like, it's an art, You have to follow the contour of the car, you got to feel the car and all of that. And he was starting to get the hang of it. He actually did a pretty good job. Car's coming along. We should have it done within the next 10 to 15 years. And also, let's go over here. I spent a lot of time carving on my head. So this wasn't so much, in technically, looking for horsepower, but it was about reducing weight, because with our Slant 6 build, weight is everything. We explained the car's at 2,117 pounds, and we have to knock it down to around 2,050 pounds, to get it to do what I expect it to do. So we worked on the block last week and sent that off to our buddy Chuck Yoder to deck it. He's taken 100 thousandths off the deck. And while he's doing that, we figured, well, let's get to work on our cylinder head. And there's a lot of porting to be done on this yet. There's a lot of work that we're going to do to the head. But the first thing I wanted to do was reduce its mass as much as possible. So people think of art in terms of like paintings, photographs, sculpture, all the classic things, right? Nobody ever really thinks of hot rodding as an art. And that's really what it is that we're doing here. We're crafting things. The people who don't get that, who don't understand it, never really get the full satisfaction of this thing, this hobby, sport, whatever you want to call it. You don't really get the satisfaction. There's an art involved in this. And aside from the porting and making the thing function better, taking an object as it was originally produced and then modifying it to suit your goals, to suit your, purpose, that's, and individualizing it, that's the art. That's where all of this, So I spent probably a good hour with this head before I actually started doing anything to it. I spent a good hour with it. I know these heads like the back of my hand, but this time around, our goal is to just reduce its mass as much as possible. I put it on the scale, it was 68 pounds bare, and I set a goal for myself, and it says 60 pounds. We're going to get this thing down to 60 pounds. It's an unrealistic goal. I know I'm not going to be able to carve 8 pounds of metal out of this thing and still have it, functional. But I set that unrealistic goal for myself, so I would push a little bit further and look a little bit deeper and a little bit more closely at the areas that I'm going to take metal out of. And I'm about halfway through it now, and I've got about 3.5 pounds sitting on my scale here. I got about 3.5 pounds out of it from where we started. So the first thing I did was I looked at this area here. Now, as this was cast, it had lumps around each of these spark plug tube openings, right? And as I felt along the inside, it's got a uniform surface on the inside. So the very first thing I did was I took these lumps down and I made this as uniform as I possibly could. This was probably worth maybe a pound or thereabouts. At the front corner, there was a boss here for mounting the alternator bracket. Big chunk that came out like this. And so all of that is gone now. It's all smoothed out and contoured. I wanted to make it look pretty. Now, I could have gone a little bit further, and I could have taken these pieces down, but I decided, and again, see, this is where the art part of it comes in. I was going to sacrifice the ½ ounce of metal that I would get out of this, but the head would still maintain, I know this is going to sound crazy. This is going to sound really crazy, okay, because maybe I'm crazy, I don't know. If I took this metal down, the head would lose its identity, right? It's just like the casting numbers, Yeah, I can get in here and I can grind down all the casting numbers and marks inside the head, right? But then the head is no longer that Slant 6 head. It's not that factory head. I know, sounds nuts. This goes back. I'll tell you where this goes back to, right? when I first like really got into the nitro thing, like I mean, I was always into it, but like when I started getting my hands in it in the 80s, right? The thing that turned me on the most about those cars at this period of time was that a lot of them were still using the original Chrysler cast iron cylinder heads. And I just loved the fact that, you know, you had these crazy machines, you know, fire and smoke and crazy things, and at the heart of it was like this hunk of cast iron that came from the factory. And I just love that about those cars. And you know, the thing would be, you know, it's custom from oil pan to fuel injector, but stuck right in the middle there was a pair of stock Chrysler cast iron cylinder heads. I love that. As I got involved in it, those heads, by the time I actually got like you know, deep involved in it, those were all gone. Everything had gone to aluminum, using the Dart aluminum, the cast heads. It was right before the billet heads and everything came in. And one by one, all of those components that I loved, because they were like still factory Chrysler pieces, got replaced. And the very last of them were the intake rockers, right? Up until like around 93, 94, thereabouts, we were still using heads that had everything situated, orientated so that you could still use the stock Chrysler intake rockers. Couldn't use the exhausts, but the intakes were still stock Chrysler rockers. And I remember, like, you know, we'd have these things, we'd have the motor blown apart between rounds and working on it, and I would look at those rockers and I'd be like, you know, there was like this warm, comforting feeling towards the rockers, you know, because they were factory rockers. And then when we went to the next generation of cylinder head where you couldn't use those rockers anymore and it became like, you know, the roller tip, you know, aftermarket rockers, that's like, at that point, that's like when I really started to not love Top Fuel anymore. Nuts, right? But, you know, I'm an artist, and artists are known to be crazy. That's part of my craziness. So, at any rate, that's where we're at with this thing. We've got approximately 20 pounds out of the block. I weighed the block before I sent it over to Chuck. It's 120 pounds. We've got about 20 pounds out of it. He's taking probably another 3 pounds out of it by decking the block, 3 to 4 pounds. Decking the block, that 100,007 inch, and we'll have that back here in, you know, a couple of days. And this thing I'm going to continue. There's a few more pieces I want to take off of this, a few more areas I want to dress down, and then I'm going to start porting on it. So next time you see this thing, we'll be in there with the grinder, and I'll show you guys how we're going to go about porting it. So that's it, just an update on things that are going around, and a little piece of existential nuttiness from Uncle Tony's head. I'll see you tomorrow.